I've been looking forward to this opportunity for a long time, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you a bit about Power Africa. And I'm based in Nairobi. It's the first US presidential initiative that actually has a headquarters that's located outside of the United States. But as a result of that, we also need to do an extra important job of doing outreach to US industry as well. And we've got a team, interagency team that involves 12 different agencies, plus a team at USAID's headquarters here of about 30 people who are doing work on that. So let me give you a little bit of background about Power Africa and how we got to where we are today. President Obama announced Power Africa during his trip last summer to the continent. While he was in South Africa, he announced an initiative that promises to increase access to electricity, basically to double the amount of electricity available and access to people in sub-Saharan Africa. Now that's a very bold aspirational goal. But then how do you get to that point? He then announced that what we were going to do is over the next few years, we were going to increase access by 20 million people and increase the amount of generation by 10,000 megawatts in 6 focused countries. Now, when you look at the context of the United States, 10,000 megawatts doesn't seem like a lot. And even on the African continent, the needs are enormous. 10,000 megawatts isn't enough. But what Power Africa is really about, it's the approach that we're taking. It's about taking a private sector, transaction-based approach to basically slam the door open for the reforms that are necessary to bring on greater investment. There are a handful of companies, US companies, that know this sector. They know the market, but there's incredible opportunity there. There's an incredible amount of liquidity, a lot of money that people want to invest, but people often just don't know how to invest. So what Power Africa is, it sort of grew out of a trip that several high-level officials from the United States, and then also another trip actually that some staffers on the Hill took, and they have the parallel Electrify Africa legislation, where they were looking at what are the key constraints to growth on the African continent. They looked all around them, and they saw expensive, dirty, diesel-powered backup generation, which added significantly to the costs of manufacturing. And these are countries that were enjoying some of the highest rates of growth in the world for the last several years, but how can they stay on that track when they're paying so much more for electricity? In a country like Liberia, where the price of electricity is over 50 cents a kilowatt hour, I mean, that would be unheard of in the United States. How can you expect a country like that to emerge from poverty? How can you expect a country like that to compete in manufacturing and exports and to increase trade? How can you expect a country like that to be able to provide health care and education if students can't study at night and medical equipment can't be run and hospitals don't exist? These countries will never emerge from poverty. We won't have stable partners. So it all comes back to power. And that's what's beyond Power Africa. It's as much of an economic growth play as it is a development play. It's trying to figure out what can we, the US government, because we have a lot of tools. We have a lot of tools in our toolbox. We have 12 different agencies involved. How can we drive the reforms that are necessary to promote the investment that's necessary and also to make sure that people have increased access to cleaner energy in a way that will also create jobs for Africans and in the process create jobs for Americans as well. And we've already seen results. We've seen results where we didn't expect to see them. As I mentioned, there's a lot of liquidity already on the African continent. And it's a question of how do you harness that liquidity in addition to investments from the United States. But what we've seen is that some of the tools that are offered are driving African companies to seek out US partners so they can access some of the tools that the US government offers. Power Africa involves, as I mentioned, 12 US government agencies. They include the United States Agency for International Development, the Overseas Private Investment Corporation, the US Trade Development Agency, the Export-Import Bank, the Department of State, the Millennium Challenge Corporation, the Department of Commerce, U.S. Department of Agriculture, the U.S. African Development Foundation, Department of Treasury, Department of Energy, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. It's backed fully by the White House, which convenes us on a regular basis. And the White House has instructed us to figure out how can you all work together to make this happen. And I can tell you a little bit about how it's been working. We have an interagency team that meets on a weekly basis, and this is actually how Washington, D.C., when people say Washington, D.C. doesn't work, I'm a Washingtonian, I've spent my whole life here. It's the only city in the United States where I've lived. It's, for me, I'm seeing Washington work in a way where it's never worked before. And we have 12 agencies that get together that we're collaborating, we're sharing information in a completely transparent process. There aren't turf battles. We're getting information directly from the field to find out what's going on, and we're working through issues. So if a company, like one of your companies, comes and speaks to one agency, you don't have to walk around to each different agency if you're interested in getting involved in Power Africa. We're creating a one-stop shop and opportunities for companies to find out about EXIM's tools, OPIC's tools, USAID's tools, all at the same time. The threshold was really low, sort of the bar was really low before, because some of the feedback that we've gotten was that people are just happy that the US government is answering their phone calls. So we're taking it a little bit, so we're not only are we responding, but we're trying to help provide solutions. More than 69% of the population of sub-Saharan Africa and 85% of the population in the rural areas do not have access to electricity. So what have we done and how are we going about doing this? I can tell you also sort of what it is and what it's not. The approach that we're taking is, as I mentioned, it's a transaction-based approach. We're putting transaction advisors on the ground whose role is to track significant projects that are either already in the pipeline or that may come on the pipeline, come into the pipeline. We're working in all kinds of areas, working with small projects, medium-sized projects, large projects, gas, wind, hydro, solar, geothermal. We're working across all areas because we all know that for any country to be successful, it has to have a master energy plan that's going to have a diverse mix of sources because of anything that happens. A country can't depend on hydro, as we've seen in Ethiopia and Kenya and part of East Africa, exclusively because when there are droughts, then they don't have electricity. And they can't depend exclusively on gas either, because prices will fluctuate, although we're seeing some of the lowest prices we've seen in history right now. And they can't rely exclusively on wind or solar either. Otherwise, they're not going to have power during certain parts of the day unless technology improves significantly and costs come down. But what we've seen is that costs have come down. And a lot of it is thanks to the work that a lot of the US companies are doing. And this is when I say I've been dying to meet with this crowd, is to try to figure out how a company in the United States has developed a new technology that just is completely unfamiliar with working in Africa might be able to use their technology and sell their technology and make money in a completely different area. And that's sort of what our role is, to try to offer the opportunity to sell US technology in other places. Because look, the US, despite what anybody tells you, we are a leader. And what we do is still among some of the best things in the world. We have some of the smartest, most innovative people in the world in the United States. And just the environment that we have constantly encourages creativity and new innovation. And Power Africa is about that. President Obama announced a commitment of $7 billion to Power Africa. Now, for those of you, and most of you know this, $7 billion isn't going to double the amount of access to electricity in sub-Saharan Africa. It's going to take probably $300 billion at least to achieve that goal. So the way that that money breaks down is most of that money actually involves loan guarantees, financing products from some of the U.S. government agencies, and a very small amount are actual appropriated funds that are being used for technical assistance, paying for transaction advisors, and other types of things. We're not going in there to try to distort the market. We're not going in there to try to build out generation with our own money, with taxpayer dollars, because that's not the right model. This needs to be private sector driven. You look at some of the countries, and one of the challenges we face in one of the countries, The 7 countries we were working are Kenya, Ethiopia, Tanzania, Nigeria, Ghana, and Liberia. Very diverse countries. Now, collectively, they comprise 40% of the population of Africa. But when you can't even compare Liberia and where it is with 23 megawatts of electricity, someone yesterday compared that to the amount of electricity that the Dallas Cowboys Stadium uses, but that's for the entire country. You can't compare that to Nigeria, which is very far along and has incredible resources, or Kenya, which is much further along than the other countries. And one of the reasons we chose this mix is we want to see how this model is going to work in different countries and what we can learn from it and expand. So the transaction advisors, going back to this transaction-based approach, we've identified a few dozen transactions, and what their role is, they're meant to be sort of the eyes and the ears on the ground. And they're the ones that are supposed to tell us what's going on with any deal, almost investment banker types, that will tell us on whose desk a condition precedent legal letter is stuck so that the ambassador can call up the attorney general and get it moving. They're the ones who tell us about potential gaps in financing so we can try to pair developers with financiers or try to find products that the U.S. government might be able to offer in order to sweeten the deal. There's all kinds of different things. We have a 5-megawatt solar project in Tanzania that was in danger of not coming online. The issue was the best they could get was a 15-year power purchasing agreement. And in order for the company to get financing, they needed to get at least a 20-year power purchasing agreement. And as a result of the pushes that we were making and our other partners, suddenly the government of Tanzania changed its policy, and now they're going to offer up to 25-year power purchasing agreements for solar and other renewables. That sounds like a very small impact, but it's actually enormous, because what it's done is, with one deal, we've demonstrated that this was the small change that was preventing the investments from happening. And so we've done the work with that one small deal. And as a result, the other investments will come along. This is what we're doing. We're not hiring a bunch of experts to come in, look at a country, and generally opine as to what we think needs to be done, and then inviting a bunch of experts to come and sit in a hotel ballroom in a country and hope that the host government sends the right people to listen to this training, or bring them to the United States and hope that they're going to send the right people there, and then hope that something is going to happen in a year or 2 years. That's not the approach that we're taking. We're sitting down with companies and we're asking them, what is it that you need to make this particular deal happen? And if we need to spend $100,000 hiring an expert that will be paired with a particular person who's working on that deal in the host government to make sure that person has the skills that he or she needs, we're going to spend the money that way rather than spend the money on the general training. Now, obviously, the trainings are extremely, extremely important, because you do need to build the capacity in the long run. But we're really taking a targeted, focused approach on how we're going to go about doing this. Another example of how are we going to double access to electricity in sub-Saharan Africa with $7 billion. Korbeti geothermal in Ethiopia. When I first started working on this almost a year ago, everyone talked about Korbeti. And this is, at the time, it was a 300-megawatt geothermal plant in Ethiopia. Ethiopia has been closed to private investment, always. And this was going to be the first opportunity for a private IPP to come in and develop this geothermal plant. And we weren't sure if they were going to do it. Before we sat down with each of the countries to make sure that they were committed to making these reforms necessary. And then there were financing issues and other things, and we didn't think this was going to come online. This summer, suddenly things aligned. Everybody's making the pushes. The different agencies are making the pushes. The Ethiopian ambassador to the United States is making the appropriate pushes. And all of a sudden, the government announced the signing of a head of terms for not a 300 megawatt, but for a 1,000 megawatt geothermal plant in Ethiopia. Now, this was completely transformational for a variety of reasons. Number one, Ethiopia is dependent on hydro as its main source of energy. And number two, the Ethiopian market is now open for business. Now, the proof is in the pudding. On Friday, I was at an event, and I had I walked up to a gentleman who I had seen just before the launch at a few different events, and I said, aren't you tired of hearing me speak? And he looks at me and he says, no, you did what you said you were going to do. I said, what are you talking about? He said, Corbetti. He said, you said you were going to open up Ethiopia. He said, we didn't believe you. It's open now, and my company, we're heading there next week, and we're going to try to engage in negotiations to see if there's opportunities for us. That's how you're going to double access to electricity in sub-Saharan Africa, by slamming open the door and creating the opportunities that are there already. But what we need to hear from you. We need to hear from you about what are the needs. In fact, on the way over here, I got an email, which is a letter from the head of GE in Africa to the administrator of USAID talking about Power Africa. And it was talking about some of the successes to date, and then it was talking about, all right, and this is what you need to do next. That's exactly the type of feedback that we need. One of the reasons, actually the key reason that I am located in Nairobi is because that's where the business is taking place. Everybody passes through Nairobi. GE has headquarters there for Africa. You've got all kinds of businesses, and people continue to come through Nairobi. You've got the bankers there. Now, just prior to launch, we were told to see what kind of private sector commitments can you get. And I thought, really, 30 days before launch, you think we're going to get written commitments from the private sector for Power Africa? We'll see how this goes. And our team went into action, and sort of like, if you build it, they will come. We got $14 billion in private sector commitments in less than 30 days. Now, there's all types of commitments. It's commitments from banks to do lending in the sector. It's commitments from companies to sell equipment. And those commitments have continued to grow. So people ask, well, what does it mean for me? Well, it means we answer your phone calls. That's number one, because that low threshold. But it means that we're trying to help you solve the issues that are preventing you, that might otherwise prevent you from investing. And we're looking for opportunities to make sure that the deals that you're working on will move forward. We're looking for new technologies. We're looking for new opportunities. I was just on the Hill, and I was asked, how do you score? How do you choose a priority transaction? It's more of an art than a science, but what we've established sort of an informal scorecard that will factor in everything from, is it a $100,000 investment of technical assistance is going to leverage 1,000 megawatts, or is it that there may be a demonstration effect for a small off-grid project? Because Power Africa, we talk about the large transactions and the big megawatts and increased access, but we also are thinking about the off-grid and the microgrid, because there's certain countries where the model simply is quite different than where it was before. And perhaps for security reasons, for economic reasons, the solutions aren't just, include distributed generation. Other successes that we've seen in the gas industry, in Nigeria, in October, the government of Nigeria began the process of privatizing the country's electricity industry by selling the bulk of the generation and distribution assets of the government-owned power holding company. Now, this is also promises to be completely transformational. Nigeria, like I said, is in a completely different place than where other countries are. But if this privatization process works, that's a model that can be used in other countries. Nigeria has a lot more in common with the countries that are the other Power Africa countries than they have with the United States and other places. They're facing the same issues. We've developed what we see as kind of Power Africa policy principles. There's certain commonalities that we've seen. Obviously, countries need to have cost-reflective tariffs, and this is part of sort of the negotiations moving, early on, and we're already seeing progress. Now, the U.S. government, we can't take credit for everything that we're doing, and we don't want to take direct credit for everything that we're doing. But I want to share a story for you. Right after the launch, a colleague of mine who works with another government, another large government, he said, did they hear about Power Africa? The person said, of course they heard about it. Not only did they hear about it, but they're going to start putting real money into building out electricity in sub-Saharan Africa instead of these loan guarantees that the U.S. government's doing. And you know what my response to that was? Well, that's fantastic. Because if all it takes is President Obama to open up his mouth to motivate people to make these types of investments, that's what our goal is. We're trying to play a convening role. We're trying to put the stamp of approval, letting people know that these are good places to invest. And we don't want to cheapen our brand. So I'll be the first person to say that a country should be dropped from being a Power Africa country if they're not willing to make the commitments that they have said that they would make. So it's really important that we hold their feet to the fire. It's really important that we have all the different partners aligned on what needs to be done. And we've seen successes in Tanzania recently where one donor was getting ready to give some money, and the other donor said, wait, there's got to be some conditionalities on that, because if you go ahead and disperse those funds, that's going to reverse all the work that we've been trying to do. And we got that donor to pull back and make sure that we got everything aligned. That's how you're going to get the successes. You need to have everybody working together. So what's next? We realize that there's a lot to do. East Africa has 15,000 megawatts of geothermal potential. It's not the least expensive place in the world. It's not the easiest place in the world to operate, but we need to make the case that this is a good investment. We're working with USEA's East Africa Geothermal Partnership to try to develop a regional geothermal strategy involving multiple partners so that we're not all tripping over ourselves and offering different things. But we want to figure out, how do you take advantage of those resources? We're responding to what experts tell us. One expert told us that, he said, I can think of one company in the United States that could actually exploit these particular geothermal fields. We're reaching out to that company, but we're the US government, so we can't just give it to that one company. We're sharing it with the Geothermal Association so they can share it with their others. We're saying, is this true? Could you do this? Is it worth our time to go to the government of Kenya and figure out how to take advantage of this and really be transformational in taking advantage of geothermal resources? We're thinking about power pools. We realize that power pools play a key role in trying to bring electricity online. Maybe the solution in Liberia is not to generate its own electricity. Maybe the solution is to build out transmission lines from other countries. We're looking at off-grid and mini-grid solutions. We're looking for new technologies. We're looking to hopefully expand to other countries at some point if we can show that our model works, but not until we can show that our model works. We have a lot of requests and a lot of interest from other countries to become Power Africa countries. And I say to them, you realize it doesn't involve a lot of money. We're not giving a lot of money. They say, no, this is what we want. We want to be in control of our own energy destiny. We don't want to have another country come in and say, all right, what do you need? I'll do it. I'll bring in the labor. I'll do all these different things for you. And then we turn around a week later and we say, what did we get ourselves into? Power Africa is about the private sector and U.S. government and other partners building the capacity and helping them control their own energy destiny. And controlling one's energy destiny doesn't just apply at the country level. It applies in the communities as well. Because when we talk about off-grid, mini-grid, we don't necessarily need to guarantee 24 hours of electricity in a remote community. But if there's a way, and we hear this all the time, poor people won't pay for electricity. You can't do it. That's baloney. I've worked in plenty of poor countries, and one of the things, I always take pictures of it. When I go to the poorest communities, I take pictures of shacks with dirt floors with DirecTV satellites on them. Why are there so many cell phones in the developing world? How did they get the money for the cell phones? People will buy the things that they want and they need, and they prioritize it. That DirecTV satellite is not being run 24 hours a day. But when there's a big soccer game on, people in the community come up with the funds to figure out how to get that thing going. And if a person in a household has the opportunity for a scratch-off card that will give them power for the 2 hours of a day that they need it to charge their cell phone, or do whatever it is they need to do, or study, people are happy with that. I've lived in plenty of countries where it's just power outages all the time. Dominican Republic, you never knew when the power was going to go out. My 3-year-old son, we were in a large toy store in Dominican Republic, huge, bigger than a Toys R Us. Power goes out. Most people cry at that age. All I hear my son is, "Se fue la luz," and starts laughing, which means the power went out. Didn't even faze him. He was so used to it. But you can't plan your day if you don't know when you're going to have power. So being able to have a solution that offers you a scratch-off card or whatever the solution is, so you know what 2 hours a day you have electricity, that's access. So we look forward to getting feedback from all of you, and we hope that we'll continue to have success. We've been seeing a lot of successes to date, and really appreciate this opportunity. Thank you.